She walked in with nothing but a hoodie, a scholarship check, and a heart full of hope. In a place polished with marble floors and whispered privilege, she was invisible until she wasn't. Amara Lewis wasn't there to cause trouble. She wasn't there to challenge anyone. She just wanted to make her very first deposit, a $5 scholarship she had earned with late nights, early mornings, and a relentless drive to rise above expectations. But before she could even reach the counter, the room had already made up its mind about her, the hoodie, the skin, the silence. They didn't see the honor student. They didn't see the CEO's daughter. They didn't see the story she carried. They only saw what they chose to see. And they judged her before she even spoke. Whispers turned into stares. Questions turned into accusations. And humiliation was served cold, right there under the gleaming chandeliers. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly prepare for, was the shadow that moved when they crossed the line, a mother's shadow, a legacy of resilience, dignity, and quiet, unstoppable power. This isn't just a black story. This isn't just a hoodie story. This is the story they tried to silence, but not today. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. It was the kind of morning that promised possibilities. A soft breeze ruffled the trees lining Crestway Avenue. Sunlight spilled across the sidewalks in long golden beams. Amara Lewis stood at the corner, the glass facade of Crestway Bank gleaming ahead like some impenetrable fortress. She adjusted her hoodie, a simple gray one that had been her favorite for years, soft from 1,000 washes, faded from 100 walks home from school. Today it was more than just clothing. It was her. Amara reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing the crisp scholarship check tucked safely inside $5,000 earned with sweat, late-night studying, countless essays, and a relentless fire to make something of herself. At just 14 years old, this was her first real step into adulthood. No parents holding her hand, no teachers guiding her words, just her. She inhaled sharply, straightened her back, and pushed the heavy glass doors open. The cold blast of conditioned air hit her, immediately followed by a wall of polished tile, golden light fixtures, and the low murmur of whispered conversations. Everything about Crestway Bank screamed wealth power, a world that had never truly opened its doors to someone like her. She walked across the lobby, her sneakers squeaking softly against the marble. Heads turned brief glances, cutting across her like tiny razors, sharp and dismissive. She felt their eyes not with admiration, but with quiet questions. What is she doing here? Who let her in? Is she lost her hoodie, her skin, her youth? They said everything before she ever opened her mouth. Amara kept her head down, steering herself toward the tall counter where a teller waited. She clutched her folder tight, the edges pressing into her palms. Inside the folder was everything she needed: her award letter, her student ID, a proud validation of all she had achieved. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed the check and documents on the counter. The teller, a slim man with sandy hair and a name tag that read, Greg, looked up with a mechanical smile that froze the second he saw her. He hesitated, then reached for the check with 2 fingers, as if touching something fragile. Amara tried to smile to make it easier somehow. Hi, she said quietly. I'd like to deposit this into my savings account, please. Greg's eyes flicked to the check, his brows pulling together in suspicion. He held the check up to the light, turning it one way then another, the seconds stretched long and uncomfortable. Behind him, another figure approached: Linda Carver, the assistant manager, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she made her way over. Linda was the kind of woman Crestway loved. Blonde, polished, precise, dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than Amara's entire wardrobe. She stopped behind. Greg folded her arms and surveyed Amara with a thin smile that did not touch her eyes. A $5,000 deposit, Linda said, her voice ringing louder than necessary, drawing glances from nearby customers. "And where exactly did you get a check like this?" Amara swallowed her throat dry. "I earned it," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "It's my scholarship award from the Horizons for Tomorrow program. I have all the paperwork." She pushed the folder closer, trying to bridge the chasm opening between her and these polished gatekeepers. Linda picked up the papers, her manicured nails tapping against the award letter. She read the heading slowly, as if suspicious of every word. Greg leaned over to glance at it too. Their faces tight with doubt, Amara could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her. 100 silent verdicts delivered without trial. The rich murmur of conversations had gone softer now, the low buzz replaced by something heavier, more toxic. She was no longer invisible. She was a spectacle, the black girl in the hoodie, the one who didn't belong. Linda snapped the folder shut, handed it back without meeting her eyes. "We'll have to verify this," she said crisply. "Until then, you will need to wait." Amara blinked, confused. "But I have everything right here," she said. "I just need to make a deposit." Linda's smile sharpened. "You'll wait until we're done," she said already, turning away, her heels clicking an impatient rhythm against the marble. Greg placed the check and ID behind the counter. Well out of reach, Amara stood frozen, her folder clutched to her chest. Around her, the lobby moved on patrons in tailored suits and designer handbags, glanced over briefly, then dismissed her like background noise. The marble floors that had once gleamed with promise now felt cold beneath her feet. She had walked into Crestway Bank full of pride. Now she stood there alone, watching her dignity being dissected piece by piece. And the story had only just begun. Minutes dragged on, each second hammering louder against Amara's chest. She shifted her weight from foot to foot, but no one paid her any attention, or maybe they paid too much. She could feel their eyes on her, pretending not to look, pretending not to judge. The polished adults in suits glanced over their phones, smirking slightly before turning away. The older woman near the waiting area clutched her handbag a little tighter. The young man in expensive loafers smirked behind his coffee cup. To them, she was not a student, not a daughter, not a scholar. She was just another black kid in a hoodie lurking where she didn't belong. Amara clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening around the folder pressed against her chest. The urge to cry burned hot behind her eyes, but she fought it down. Crying would be giving them something. Something they did not deserve. Stay calm, stay steady. That was what her mother always said. Control the storm inside, and they can never own you. Across the lobby, Linda spoke quietly with Greg, her voice low but sharp enough for Amara to catch snippets. "We can't be too careful these days. You know what kind of scams are happening." Greg nodded, glancing over his shoulder at Amara, as if she were already guilty of something. Amara closed her eyes for a brief second, willing herself not to react. It would be easy to get angry, easy to yell and demand respect. But anger would be twisted, used against her, turned into proof that they had been right about her all along. She needed to be smarter than their assumptions. She needed to be stronger than their prejudice. The lobby bustled around her. Tellers called out customer names. Paperwork, shuffled phones rang. But Amara stood still, frozen in a moment that refused to let her breathe. A little boy tugged at his mother's, hand pointing at her mommy. "Why is that girl standing there all alone?" he asked in a loud, clear voice. The mother hissed at him to be quiet, pulling him away so fast he stumbled. Amara's cheeks burned with fresh humiliation, but she kept her face neutral, her eyes forward. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. She wanted to check her phone, to text her mom, to call for help. But she had left her phone in her locker at school. One more mistake, one more piece of evidence they would use to say she was irresponsible, unprepared, out of place. A heavy sigh escaped her lips before she could stop it. Linda shot her a look, an eyebrow raised as if even breathing too loudly was a problem. Amara straightened her shoulders, biting the inside of her cheek to hold herself together. Then she saw it. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the security guard near the entrance, shifting his stance. Watching her, waiting, his hand casually resting on his belt where his radio hung ready for what Amara swallowed hard. Was she a security risk now because she had a scholarship check? Because she wore a hoodie? Because her skin was not the color they were used to seeing in this marble palace? She thought of her mother, of the late nights she stayed up helping with homework, of the endless speeches about dignity and composure. Hold your head high, even when they want to see you fall. Especially then Amara took a deep breath, rooted her sneakers to the marble floor and stood tall. She was not here by mistake. She had earned this, every bit of it. No one could take that from her. She stared straight ahead, letting the room blur around her, letting the cold air and the whispers and the sideways glances slide off her like rain. The check was real. Her achievements were real. And if they could not see that it was their failure, not hers. Across the room, Greg and Linda continued to whisper, frowning down at her documents as if they were decoding an ancient script. The security guard shifted again, taking a slow step closer. The tension coiled tighter around her, an invisible rope pulling at her chest, and yet Amara did not move. She did not apologize. She did not lower her eyes. She stood there, black girl, hoodie scholar story, waiting, not for their approval, but for her moment, the moment that would tell them, and the whole world watching, that she was not afraid, that she was not small, that she was not going anywhere. The clock on the far wall ticked on each second, stretching longer than the last. Amara stood there still as stone as the marble floor beneath her seemed to grow colder. She heard the whispers, some curious, some cruel. A woman in a pearl necklace leaned into her companion, murmuring something that made both of them glance her way and shake their heads. A man in a tailored gray suit glanced at her, once dismissed her with a curl of his lip, then went back to scrolling on his phone. Every moment that passed made it clearer. They had already decided who she was, and no award letter, no scholarship check, no straight a report card would change their minds. Because it was never about her achievements. It was about the hoodie. It was about the skin. It was about the story they had already written in their heads. Amara shifted her weight slightly, feeling the fatigue creeping up her legs, her shoulders heavy with the weight of invisible judgment. But she refused to sit down, refused to slump, refused to shrink. She remembered what her mother always told her. You cannot control their eyes. You can only control how you carry yourself under their gaze. Carry yourself like a mountain solid, immovable, unchangeable. So she did. Linda emerged from the back office, then her high heels clicking sharply on the marble. Her expression tight with something between suspicion and thinly veiled annoyance. She spoke loudly again, making sure the room could hear. We're still verifying the legitimacy of the documents, she announced, as if Amara had been caught trying to pass fake bills, as if she were some criminal caught red-handed. Heads turned again, phones raised slightly, some pretending to text others, pretending not to record. Amara felt her stomach twist, but her face remained neutral. A lifetime of lessons in dignity wrapped around her shoulders like a second hoodie. She stood her ground even as every fiber of her being screamed, to run, to escape, to disappear. But she would not give them that satisfaction. From the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished brass fixtures along the wall. A small figure, a gray hoodie, a black girl with her chin lifted, her back straight, her spirit intact. She whispered to herself so quietly that no one else could hear. You belong here. You earned this. Nothing they say changes that. Linda and Greg continued murmuring behind the counter, occasionally glancing her way with thinly veiled distrust. The security guard loomed near the entrance, arms crossed, still watching her like a hawk circling above prey. A few more minutes passed, though to Amara they felt like entire lifetimes. Then suddenly the heavy glass doors of Crestway Bank swung open once again. The sound echoed across the lobby. Sharp, commanding, everyone turned to look. And there, stepping through the doorway, was a woman who moved like she owned the very ground she walked on. Dr. Simone Lewis. Amara's mother, her navy blue suit fit her like armor. Her black heels clicked authoritatively against the marble. Her posture unshakable, her gaze sharp and burning. Conversations halted. The atmosphere shifted like a tide pulled by an unseen force. Dr. Lewis's eyes swept the room, once catching every whisper, every stare, every assumption hanging in the air. Then they settled on her daughter, standing alone in the middle of it all. Amara saw the flash of anger behind her mother's calm exterior. Not anger at her, but anger at the world that dared to try and belittle her child. Dr. Lewis crossed the lobby in a few measured steps, the heels of her shoes echoing louder than any insult that had been thrown. She reached Amara's side, placed a steady hand on her shoulder, then turned to face the counter. Linda looked up, startled, her mouth parting slightly in confusion. Before she could say anything, Dr. Lewis spoke, her voice calm, clear, and devastating. I believe you have something that belongs to my daughter, she said. Not a question, a statement, the kind that left no room for argument. Greg fumbled behind the counter, scrambling to gather the check and documents. Linda straightened her blazer, her cheeks flushing red, but she plastered on a brittle smile. I apologize, ma'am. We were just following protocol, she said. But the words rang hollow, even she seemed to know it. Dr. Lewis gave her a slow, measured look, the kind of look that made powerful men second-guess themselves. Without another word, she extended her hand. Greg placed the check and folder into it like a student handing back a test. He had failed, Amara watched. Quietly, her heart pounding in her ears, but not from fear. From pride, from vindication, from knowing that she had held her ground. And now the world was shifting because of it. As Dr. Lewis tucked the documents safely away, she turned back to Amara and smiled. A real smile, full of warmth and fierce pride. Then she looked out across the lobby one more time, at the whispering mouths, the judging eyes, and with a soft but deadly finality, she said, my daughter's success does not require your approval. The words dropped into the silence like a stone into still water, rippling outward, shaking everything it touched. Without waiting for a response, Dr. Lewis turned. Amara followed, her hoodie pulled up once more. Not in shame, but as a crown, because today they had tried to tear her down, and today they had failed. The next day felt quieter than usual. The air at Cresthill Prep was still crisp with early spring chill, but something beneath it had shifted. Amara Lewis walked the hallway with her usual silence, hoodie-up backpack slung over one shoulder, a math workbook clutched to her chest. She kept her head down, not out of fear, but out of focus, because she knew how things moved here. At Cresthill, noise came with consequences and silence was survival, but even silence couldn't stop what was coming. In the front lobby, a girl leaned against a marble column, scrolling lazily through her phone, her fingers covered in rings that glinted like little knives. Savannah Blake, 17, senior daughter of State Senator Robert Blake, and very aware of what her name meant in places that valued legacy over merit. She wore privilege like a second skin, her perfectly curled hair bouncing as she laughed with a friend nearby, loud enough to be heard across the entryway. She caught sight of Amara, and something in her expression shifted. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. Amara passed quietly, but Savannah pushed away from the column, her voice rising, just slightly aimed like a dart. "Didn't know they let people in with hoodies now," she said, her tone airy, innocent. A few students nearby chuckled, not because the comment was funny, but because it was safe. Amara paused only for a second, then kept walking. But the dart had landed Savannah, grin tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, watching Amara disappear around the corner. "She really thinks she's someone now," she muttered. The friend next to her laughed and the hallway moved on. But something had begun. Later that day in honors English, Amara sat in her usual seat in the back row. Her notebook, open pen, poised, listening carefully as Mr. Callahan spoke about Toni Morrison. The room was quiet, sunlight cutting long lines across the desks, until Savannah's voice broke through the stillness. She raised her hand mid-discussion, flashing her practiced smile. "Don't you think some authors make everything about race?" she asked Mr. Callahan paused, caught off guard, but recovered with a neutral reply. "Well, Morrison's work often explores the realities of racial identity in American society. That's central to her narrative truth." Savannah tilted her head, her smile sharpening. "I just think sometimes people make too much of it. Like, we get it. You had a hard time, but maybe it's time to move on." The words floated intentionally vague, but heavy with intent. Amara felt several pairs of eyes shift toward her. She didn't move, didn't look up. She knew the tactic. It wasn't about her directly, not yet, but it was an opening shot. A signal Savannah wasn't just speaking to the teacher. She was setting the stage. The class moved on, but the moment hung there like a note that wouldn't quite fade. By lunch, Amara had already decided to take her tray to the corner table near the library doors. She wasn't in the mood for noise or stares or half whispers disguised as small talk. She moved through the cafeteria line, grabbed a bottle of water, and quietly paid. But as she turned, Savannah brushed past her a little too close. "Oops, my bad," she said, not even glancing back. Amara didn't respond, just kept walking. At her table, she opened her notebook, scribbled down a few lines from her last class, trying to center herself. But a voice rose again across the room, Savannah loud enough to be heard. "Imagine getting handed a check and thinking it makes you better than everyone else." Laughter followed quick and sharp. Amara closed her notebook slowly. She didn't look up, didn't respond, because she knew this wasn't about a scholarship. It was about a story Savannah had already decided to write for her. A story full of assumptions, resentment, and unspoken rules about who deserved. What the hoodie, the scholarship, the silence, it all bothered her, and now she was pushing, waiting for a reaction. But Amara had already made a decision. She wasn't going to play the game. Not Savannah's way. Let her talk. Let them laugh, because Amara had seen what silence could do. And when the time came, her story would speak for itself, louder than any whisper ever could. The next few days were quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that made Amara's skin itch. Not the peaceful kind, but the waiting kind. Something was shifting beneath the surface at Cresthill, a slow churn of looks and whispers that, built with every passing class, Amara had grown used to being invisible. Now she was being seen, but not in the way she deserved. It wasn't the kind of attention you earned. It was the kind you were marked with. The scholarship check had done more than open a savings account. It had opened a conversation behind closed doors at lunch tables and locker rooms. They were talking about her, not her grades, not her talent, not her work ethic, her hoodie, her name, her skin. On Wednesday, Amara walked into chemistry to find her seat already taken. Two girls, both from Savannah's circle, sat casually in her usual row, laughing, flipping through lip gloss options on their phones. She stood for a second, waiting for them to move, but they didn't even look up. She cleared her throat softly, polite. "Sorry, that's my seat." The taller girl didn't even pause. Didn't see your name on it? Then came the laugh, not from her, but from the girl behind them. A small group of students looked over, some curious, some smiling carefully. Before returning to their desks, Amara said nothing. She moved to the corner seat by the supply shelf, the one no one wanted. It was small, awkward, too close to the humming fan in the ceiling. But it was quiet, and Amara could still think in the quiet. That afternoon in the hall outside the gym, Savannah leaned against a row of lockers, laughing with her usual entourage. Amara passed them like she always did, head high, shoulders back. She didn't expect kindness. She didn't need it. But she did expect basic respect. Instead, Savannah's voice cut through the air, sharp and deliberately loud. "Hey, Amara, you ever think about saying thank you?" Amara stopped, half-turned, confused. "For what?" Savannah smiled sweetly, but her eyes were ice. "For all the attention you're getting. Some of us had to work to get noticed." There was a beat of silence followed by low laughter from behind Savannah. Amara stared at her for a long second and then simply said, "I didn't ask for attention. I asked for a bank deposit." Savannah's smile faltered for half a second, but she covered it quickly, tilting her head. "Well, I guess that's the kind of thing that happens when you show up in a hoodie. Like you're at a bus stop instead of a private school." The words didn't need to be louder. Everyone nearby had already heard them. Amara didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just turned and walked away. And that made Savannah even angrier, because Savannah didn't understand silence. She only understood control. That evening, Amara sat at the dining table with her mom eating in near silence. Dr. Lewis was reading emails. Her phone buzzing every few minutes, Amara stirred her rice, watching the light dance across the clean marble counter. "You okay?" her mom asked finally without looking up. Amara nodded, then paused. "Yeah, just tired." Dr. Lewis looked up now, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You want to talk about it?" Amara shook her head, a small, tired smile tugging at her lips. "Not yet, I'm handling it." Her mother studied her for a long second, then nodded. "Just remember, handling it doesn't mean carrying it alone." Amara didn't respond, but her mother's words stayed with her the rest of the night. The next day, Savannah escalated. It was in small things, intentional things. A shove in the crowded hallway that was just a little too hard. A rumor whispered just loudly enough to be heard. Someone posted a photo of Amara's hoodie in a school group chat with a caption, "Guess who thinks she's better than everyone else, but dresses like she sleeps in a bus station." Laugh reacts inside, jokes, comment after comment. Amara saw it all and deleted nothing. She wouldn't explain herself not to. People who didn't care to listen, because deep down she knew something Savannah didn't. Every story that starts with ridicule ends in revelation, and hers wasn't finished yet. By Friday, the tension at Cresthill had a rhythm. A look here, a whisper there, a carefully timed laugh when Amara walked into a room. But something about that morning felt different. The air buzzed in the cafeteria, like a storm brewing just beyond the glass. Amara sat in her usual spot alone at the corner table hood. Up book open, pretending to read, but watching everything. Her silence wasn't retreat, it was surveillance. Across the room, Savannah laughed louder than necessary, her voice sharp and sweet at the same time. A group surrounded her, half listening, half watching. Amara waiting for something. Then it came. Savannah stood tray in hand, that practiced smile on her lips, the kind that never reached her eyes. She walked slowly, deliberately, each step designed to draw attention. Students glanced. Up then, down then, back up again. She made her way toward Amara's table, eyes locked, a performance already in motion. Amara didn't move, didn't look away. Savannah stopped a few feet away, tilting her head. "So what's it feel?" "Like to be the charity case of the year." The cafeteria grew quieter, not silent but sharp with listening. Amara closed her book, gently marking the page, then looked up. I didn't realize effort was considered charity now. She said the words were calm, measured, but they hit harder than a shout. Savannah's smile twitched, but she kept going. Sure, but effort doesn't pay tuition here. Your little check wouldn't even cover textbooks. She held up her tray, smirking. Maybe you should spend less. Time being noble and more time learning how this place works. Amara blinked once, slow, unbothered. I know how this place works. That's why I don't need to prove anything to you. And just like that, the mask slipped, Savannah's smile vanished, and in its place something colder, something that didn't like being dismissed. She took one more step closer, now hovering over Amara. You think you're better than us, she hissed, voice low but hard enough to carry. You walk around in that hoodie like, it makes you deep, but all it makes you is small. Amara didn't flinch. She looked Savannah in the eye, steady, unmoving. I wear this hoodie because I earn the right to be comfortable wherever I go. Including here, Savannah's jaw clenched, her tray trembling slightly in her hands, and then she made her choice. She dumped it right there in front of everyone. Mac and cheese apple slices, chocolate milk, spilling across the table, splashing onto Amara's jeans. Her books, her hoodie gasps, echoed through the cafeteria, followed by stunned silence, and the quiet click of someone starting to record. Amara didn't move. Not even a blink. The food slid off her lap onto the floor, but she stayed still, head high. Savannah stood frozen, realizing too late the scene she had just created. The quiet now was deafening, cameras, raised mouths hanging open, and Amara, without a single word, picked up her napkin, wiped her hands, and stood. She didn't yell, didn't cry. She simply looked at Savannah, the girl who had tried to humiliate her, and said, You thought I'd break? That's the problem with people like you. You confuse silence with weakness. Then she stepped around the mess, walked straight out the door, and left Savannah standing in the wreckage she'd created. In the hallway, Amara kept walking, heart pounding, not with fear, but with fire. She didn't care about the video or the mess on her hoodie or the stairs, because now everyone had seen it. The ones who laughed, the ones who stayed silent, the ones who knew better but said nothing. They'd seen it and they would remember, because humiliation needs an audience. But so does dignity. And Amara had given them both. By Monday morning, Cresthill Prep had changed. The hallways buzzed not with lessons or gossip, but with something heavier. The video had spread faster than wildfire. Someone had posted it to the unofficial student page. Then it jumped to Snapchat, then TikTok, then whispered onto every lunch table and locker room. The caption was simple: Scholarship girl gets served Amara's hoodie. The tray of food crashing onto her books, her calm, her quiet, her strength. All captured, edited, spliced with laughing emojis, soundtracked with pop music turned into content. It wasn't just a moment anymore, it was entertainment. Amara knew the second she stepped onto campus. The way people turned, pretending to talk, but their eyes locking on her, watching her like a car wreck. You couldn't look away from. She pulled her hoodie up tighter, not to hide but to shield herself. A moving fortress walking through the gauntlet. At her locker, two juniors leaned nearby, pretending to scroll their phones, but one nudged the other, whispering too loudly. She thought she was untouchable. Now she's just another joke, Amara kept. Her back straight, unlocked her locker, ignored them. But the words burrowed deep anyway. Not because they were true, but because she had fought so hard to be seen, and now she was being seen for all the wrong reasons. In chemistry, a folded piece of paper slid onto her desk. Amara opened it, expecting notes from class. Instead, it was a printed meme, a photoshopped image of her hoodie stained with cafeteria food, overlaid with the words, "Maybe next time use your scholarship to buy some style." A ripple of laughter passed through the back row. She folded the paper without expression, tucked it into her notebook, and went back to solving chemical equations. The formula for silence for survival. Keep your head down, keep moving, because the only way out was through. At lunch, she didn't even bother with the cafeteria. Instead, she took her sandwich to the edge of the courtyard behind the science building, where no one really went except during fire drills. The cold wind stung her cheeks, but it was better than the sting of 100 stares. She ate quickly alone, knees tucked up to her chest, her back against the brick wall. Every bite tasted like paper, but she forced herself to finish because they would not starve her spirit no matter how many times. They tried to humiliate her. By midweek, the whispers had morphed into something worse. It wasn't just jokes now. It was rumors. Made-up stories passed from locker to locker, class to class. That Amara had lied about her scholarship, that she had only gotten it because the school wanted to look diverse, that she was ungrateful, entitled a charity case in a hoodie. The lies built on each other, feeding themselves like a bonfire that no one dared put out, because burning someone else was easier than facing your own. Emptiness in Amara quiet. Black-hooded successful was the perfect fuel. In AP English, Mr. Callahan tried to continue the unit on rhetoric, but the air was thick, heavy buzzing with subtext. When he asked for volunteers to read, the room was silent. Then Savannah's hand shot up, a glint in her eyes. She read a passage about pride, the downfall of heroes, the dangers of forgetting your place. Every word was perfectly chosen, each one slicing deeper than the last. Not illegal, not explicit, but everyone understood. The real subject wasn't the paragraph. It was Amara sitting, quietly, hood-up pen tapping slowly against her notebook, marking time, marking pain. That night at home, Amara sat on her bed staring at the ceiling. Her homework lay untouched beside her, her backpack half opened. Her hoodie, the same one from that first day, hung over the back of her chair, still stained faintly at the cuff with chocolate milk she hadn't managed to scrub out. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet fill the room, letting it wrap around her like armor, because there was power in silence, even when it felt like defeat. Especially then, tomorrow she would go back. She would walk those hallways. She would sit in those classes. She would not bow. She would not explain. She would not erase herself to make others more comfortable, because the story they were telling wasn't hers. And when the time came, she would tell her own Thursday. Morning, the sky hung low and gray over Cresthill, prep mirroring the heaviness pressing down on Amara's chest. She zipped up her hoodie, tugging the edges down over her hands, and walked through the double doors into the main hall. It hit her before she even made it to her locker. The silence, not the absence of sound, but the kind of silence that buzzed with energy. Dozens of eyes turned to her, some lingering, some darting away quickly. The whispers started immediately, a low tide rolling through the lockers and classrooms. It was different today. Not just snickering behind screens, not just hallway jabs and comments. Today it was public. Today, they wanted a show. Near the trophy case, someone had taped up a new poster, a photoshopped image again. Amara's face, but this time exaggerated, her hoodie drawn with cartoon rips, a giant red arrow pointing to the food stains. Above it, bold letters screamed, "Hoodie Hero, saving the world. One free meal at a time." Laughter rippled through the hall. Phones lifted to take pictures, capture her reaction. Some students tried to hide their smirks. Others laughed openly, and Savannah stood nearby with her, arms crossed, leaning casually against a locker, watching waiting. Amara froze for half a second, just half. Then she moved forward, steady, unrushed. She passed the poster, past Savannah, past the circling crowd. Her sneakers squeaked once against the polished floor, a small, lonely sound swallowed up by the rising tide of cruelty. At her locker, Amara opened the door slowly, methodically. Someone had shoved something inside, A brown paper bag, grease-stained and sagging on it, written in black marker, "For the scholarship kid, we know you need it." She pulled it out carefully, feeling a sick twist in her stomach, but showing nothing on her face. The bag dripped slightly from the bottom, the smell of spoiled milk hitting her nose. A few feet away, someone snickered loud and cruel. Amara held the bag high for a moment and then walked it over to the nearest trash can. She dropped it inside without a word, without a glance at anyone, and walked back to her locker, still silent, still standing. Third period history class. She slipped into her seat just as the bell rang. The teacher, Mrs. Hanlon, barely glanced up, too used to the undercurrent of teenage politics to intervene. Amara pulled out her notebook, eyes down, ignoring the buzzing of notifications from nearby phones. Another video was making the rounds. Someone had edited a short clip splicing together footage from the cafeteria, the memes, the fake food bag, set to circus music. It was cruel, obvious, and viral, but Amara kept her head bent over her notes, copying down lecture points with steady, deliberate strokes. She would not react. She would not give them the show they wanted, because they did not deserve her anger, her fear, or her pain. After class, as students filtered out, Savannah lingered by the door. She blocked the exit for a moment, pretending to tie her shoe, forcing Amara to stop. When Amara approached, Savannah looked up with a grin too wide to be real. "Hey, hoodie girl," she said, mock sweetness dripping from every syllable. "You know you should thank me." Amara said nothing, just stared at her. Blank measures. Savannah chuckled. "Seriously, without me, no one would even know your name." She stepped aside, finally waving, her hand grandly like a royal dismissal. Amara walked past her shoulder, brushing lightly but intentionally. Not a shove, not an act of violence. Just presence, real and undeniable. Savannah flinched only for a second, because nothing unsettles cruelty faster than someone who refuses to kneel before it. That afternoon, Amara sat on the bleachers behind the gym. The place was usually empty except for late practice. The sky overhead was still heavy, the clouds threatening rain but not delivering. She pulled her hoodie tight around herself, but not to disappear, to feel grounded. She watched the fields stretch out before her, the empty goalposts, the distant woods beyond the fence line, and she thought about every word, every laugh, every photo, every cruel little attempt to break her, and she realized something. They were trying so hard because they were afraid. Afraid of what she represented. Afraid of someone who didn't ask for their approval. Afraid of a black girl in a hoodie who walked through their world without flinching. She smiled softly to herself. A real smile this time. Small, steady, unyielding. Because they had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. By Friday afternoon, Cresthill's halls buzzed like a beehive. Word traveled fast here. And the story of the hoodie girl had already twisted itself into 100 versions, each more exaggerated than the last. Some said Amara had freaked out and thrown food herself. Others claimed she had stormed out crying. One rumor even suggested she had been suspended for causing a disturbance. None of it was true, but truth didn't seem to matter much at Cresthill these days. Amara sat quietly in study hall, head down, earbuds, but no music playing, just silence. Her armor. Across the room, a group of students clustered around Savannah's table, laughing loudly, showing each other something on a phone screen. Savannah smiled, that perfect politician's smile, her blonde hair catching the late afternoon sun, slanting through the windows. Amara could feel their eyes slide toward her, could feel the smirks, the invisible weight trying to crush her. She breathed in, slowly counted to 4, breathed out even slower. The rhythm steadied her. The rhythm reminded her she was more than their version of her. Much more. After study hall, on her way to the library, she caught the whispers again. A boy she didn't know muttered as she passed, Must be nice getting handed everything for free. The girl next to him giggled loud enough to make sure Amara heard. Amara paused, turned her head slightly, caught his gaze for a second. No words, no fight, just a steady look. The boy blinked, looked away first. It was small, almost nothing, but it was a crack, and cracks were how walls eventually fell. Later that day, an announcement buzzed over the intercom. All scholarship recipients were asked to report to the auditorium after last period for a recognition ceremony. Amara's stomach twisted. Another stage. Another opportunity for them to turn her into a spectacle. Still, she packed her books, zipped up her hoodie, and made her way to the auditorium when the final bell rang. She would not hide, she refused. The auditorium lights were harsh, the folding chairs cold beneath her hands. Students trickled in, most chatting loudly, some scrolling through their phones. Amara spotted Savannah a few rows back, seated with her usual crowd, whispering and laughing. Of course she came. Of course she wanted to see it up close. Amara set her jaw focused on the front of the room, on the stage where a small podium stood waiting. Andrews, the school's principal, stepped up to the microphone. He cleared his throat, smiled stiffly. Today we honor the students who have achieved outstanding academic success and have earned recognition through their hard work and dedication. He went on reading names, handing out certificates. Each name called was met with polite applause. Amara sat still, hands resting in her lap. When her name was called, she rose. The applause was scattered, lukewarm, but she walked steadily up to the stage, crossed it without flinching, accepted her certificate, smiled tightly, and turned back to her seat. From the corner of her eye, she saw Savannah smirking, whispering something into her friend's ear. Another dagger, another invisible wound. But Amara carried them now like medals, proof she had survived every shot fired her way. After the ceremony, as students filed out, Amara lingered in the lobby. She needed a moment, just a breath, but the world refused to give her even that. Savannah approached, phone in hand, recording, smiling that snake smile. Smile for the camera. Hoodie, hero, she said sweetly. A few students nearby laughed. Phones lifted, ready to catch whatever happened next. Amara looked at Savannah, looked at the lens, and for the first time in days she spoke clearly, calmly but loudly enough for everyone. To hear you keep telling stories about me, she said, voice steady as stone. But you forgot something, Savannah blinked, thrown off by the directness. Amara stepped closer, just a fraction. You don't get to write my story, she said, and you definitely don't get to end it. She turned then, without waiting for a reply, and walked straight through the gathering crowd. Not rushed, not fleeing, moving with the quiet gravity of someone who knew exactly who she was. The students parted without thinking, making way for her. A ripple moved through the space she left behind. Whispers again, but this time different. Not mocking, not laughing. Something else. Something almost like respect, or at least recognition. Outside, the late afternoon sun warmed Amara's face. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling it. The light, the weight lifting just slightly. She knew this wasn't over. She knew the hard days would come again, but so would the good ones, and she would be ready for both, because her hoodie wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was her shield, her standard, her silent flag, and today it had not fallen. Monday morning arrived heavy and mean. The sun barely broke through the low clouds, and the air around Cresthill Prep seemed thick with something unspoken. Amara Lewis felt it the moment she stepped onto campus. The glances were sharper, the whispers more urgent, like a wave building strength offshore. She pulled her hoodie tighter around herself, tucked her hands deep into her pockets, and kept walking. But she knew something was coming. Something worse. At her locker, a piece of paper was taped across the door. Bright neon pink, impossible to miss. At first glance, it looked like another cruel meme. another joke to be ignored. But as she peeled it off, her heart stuttered. It wasn't a meme. It was a fake notice styled like an official Cresthill document. At the top, in bold letters, notice of expulsion for academic fraud. Beneath it typed in mock serious font due to recent revelations regarding fabricated scholarship applications and falsified academic records, a student known as Amara Lewis has been expelled effective immediately. It was signed forged with the name of the principal and stapled at the bottom a blown-up photo of Amara, mid-blink, mid-movement, cropped from the cafeteria video Savannah's work. It had her fingerprints all over it. The cruelty was no longer whispered now. It was printed, posted, declared. And Amara knew this was not just kids being mean. This was calculated. This was an attack meant to strip her bare in front of everyone. She crumpled the fake notice, slowly stuffed it into her backpack, and stood there for a moment, fighting the rising heat behind her eyes. She could hear the snickers from down the hall, the clicks of phones capturing her reaction. They wanted her to break. They were daring her to, but not today, not yet. Third period was worse. As she entered her English class, a new round of whispers chased her through the door. On the whiteboard at the front of the room, someone had scribbled a message in bold black marker before class started. Fake scholar, hoodie fraud, Mr. Callahan quickly wiped it off when he saw it muttering something about immature behavior, but the damage was already done. The image was burned into the room's memory, seared into the space between Amara and her classmates. No one said a word directly to her, but no one stood up either. Silence again, but this time it felt heavier, like complicity. At lunch, Amara sat outside again in the same spot behind the science building. The sky above her churned gray, threatening rain. She picked at her sandwich without appetite, her mind spinning. How far would they go? How much more would they pile on before anyone said enough? She thought about her mother, about every lesson in dignity and self-respect she had ever been taught. But she also thought about justice, about the line between enduring and enabling, and she realized slowly, steadily, they had crossed that line, and maybe it was time she stopped carrying this burden in silence. When the final bell rang, Amara moved through the hallways with purpose. No longer slinking along the edges, no longer ducking her head. She walked to the administration office, straight through the double doors, past the receptionist, who barely looked up. Inside, she asked calmly to see Mr. Andrews. The principal emerged from his office moments later, looking surprised to see her standing there. "Amara, everything okay?" He asked, his voice too cheerful, too distracted. She held out the crumpled pink notice, her hand steady. "This was posted on my locker this morning," she said, voice even controlled. Mr. Andrews took it, frowning as he scanned the fake expulsion letter. His eyebrows drew together, his mouth tightening. "And someone wrote this on the whiteboard in English class." Amara added, her voice still calm but now sharper at the edges. Andrews sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Teenagers can be cruel, you know how it is. We'll remind students about respect and appropriate behavior." A brush off, a standard speech. Amara did not blink, did not back down. "No, sir," she said, "I'm not here for reminders. I'm here because this is harassment and it needs to stop." Her words hung there heavier than the gray sky outside. For a moment, the principal said nothing. Then he nodded stiffly, clearing his throat. "I'll look into it," said, "I promise." But Amara knew better. Looking into it was not the same as fixing it. And now, for the first time, she realized the adults weren't going to save her. The system wasn't going to save her. If this story was going to change, she would have to be the one to change it. As she walked out of the office, her sneakers squeaking softly against the linoleum floor, Amara felt something new building inside her. Not anger, not fear. Something deeper. Something steadier. Resolve, the quiet kind that grows under pressure. The silent kind that no rumor, no poster, no cruel whisper can ever crush. They had crossed the line, And soon they would see what that really meant. Amara did not waste time. That night after dinner, after dishes, after the house had gone quiet, pulled out her old laptop, the one her mom had saved up to buy 2 birthdays ago. She opened a blank document and started typing. Not a rant, not an attack. A letter, clear, measured, powerful, a recount of every incident, the cafeteria humiliation, the fake notices, the doctored videos, the silent complicity from students, the indifferent brush-offs from administration. She listed dates, described behaviors, included the screenshots she had quietly collected, the whispered threats caught in passing. She wasn't just telling a story, she was building a case. Because when the system ignored you, you didn't scream into the void. You gave them something they could not dismiss. By midnight, the letter was complete. Amara leaned back in her chair, eyes burning from the screen, but heart steady. She reread it once, twice. No anger leaked through, only truth. She attached it to an email, addressed it to the school superintendent, copied the school board, and hit send. Her hands trembled for a second afterward, not from fear, but from the release of it all. No more silence, no more hoping someone else would fix it. She had taken the first step herself. The next morning at school felt different. Maybe it was just her. Maybe it was the storm she knew was already rolling in behind the scenes. She walked the halls with her head high, her hoodie up her backpack slung across one shoulder. Savannah and her crowd still loitered near the front steps, laughing too loudly, performing confidence. But Amara saw it now. The cracks, the nervous glances, the way they clung to their phones like shields. They knew they felt it too. First period dragged by then, second, then third. Teachers glanced at her more often, some awkwardly kind, some carefully neutral. By lunch, the whispers were louder, but this time different. Not cruel, not mocking, curious, nervous. Amara sat at her usual outside table alone by choice, eating her sandwich in peace. Across the courtyard, Savannah huddled with her friends. Her phone pressed to her ear, face tight with worry. The energy had shifted. The tide was turning. Halfway through lunch, an announcement buzzed over the loudspeakers. Would Amara Lewis please report to the principal's office? The courtyard went still for a moment, all eyes flickering to her, waiting to see if she would flinch, waiting to see if she would fold. Amara packed her lunch calmly, zipped her backpack, stood and walked toward the main building. Each step felt lighter than the last. Inside the principal's office, Mr. Andrews waited, but he was not alone. Beside him sat Ms. Green, the district's diversity and equity officer, a woman Amara recognized from assembly posters but had never seen in person before. Her presence said everything. This was no longer an internal school matter. This was bigger. Please sit down, Ms. Green said, her voice firm but kind. Amara did, hands folded in her lap, chin lifted. Mr. Andrews cleared his throat, shuffling papers nervously. Amara, we received your letter, he began, but Ms. Green cut in smoothly. And I personally reviewed the documentation you provided. She said, first, I want to thank you for your bravery. What you described is serious and it demands serious action. Amara felt a warmth bloom quietly in her chest. Not victory, not smugness, just relief. Finally, someone was listening. Someone who could not pretend anymore. Ms. Green continued. Effective immediately, an investigation has been opened into the harassment you experienced. Additionally, we have placed temporary suspensions on students identified in the materials you submitted, pending further review. Amara blinked. Suspensions, consequences, not just whispered promises or empty apologies. Real action, real accountability, Mr. Andrews looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. Amara allowed herself a small breath of satisfaction, not for revenge, but for justice. for the first crack in the wall that had been built to keep girls like her silent. After the meeting walking back to class, Amara felt the stares again. But they were different now. No more laughter, no more jeers, just wide eyes, quiet mouths. A space opened around her in the hallway, not out of fear, but out of a growing awareness. She had done something they never expected. She had stood her ground, and the world slowly was shifting because of it. She reached her locker, twisted the dial, opened the metal door with a soft creak. Inside, taped to the back wall, was a new piece of paper. But this one was different. Plain white, in shaky handwriting. It read, "Saw what you did. Proud of you." No name, no signature. Just a few words, enough to remind her she was not alone. Never had been, and never would be again. By Tuesday morning, the change was undeniable. Cresthill Prep felt different, as if the very walls themselves. Elves had absorbed the tension. Students gathered in small, buzzing groups, whispering furiously over phones, eyes darting nervously toward the administration building. Something was happening. Something big, and for once it wasn't happening to Amara. It was happening because of her. Savannah Blake was nowhere to be seen. Neither were several of her closest friends, the ones who had always flanked her like shadows. Rumors flew through the halls faster than text notifications. Suspensions, pending disciplinary hearings. Parents called in for emergency meetings. Some said there might even be expulsions on the table. Amara walked through it all, hoodie up steps, calm and measured. She made no grand gestures, no triumphant smiles. She didn't need to. The truth was working, louder than any scream could, and the ones who had laughed the hardest were now the ones whispering the quietest. In third period English, the teacher paused the lesson halfway through. Mr. Callahan cleared his throat, set down his chalk, and faced the class with a tight, unreadable expression. "I want to take a moment to remind everyone that Cresthill is committed to fostering a respectful, supportive environment for all students," he said. A few students shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at their desks. Amara sat perfectly still, pen poised above her notebook. She didn't need Mr. Callahan to say her name. Everyone knew exactly who had forced that speech into existence. And for the first time, Amara felt something more than just survival filling her chest. She felt power, not the loud kind Savannah loved, not the fake, brittle kind built on cruelty, the real kind, the kind that comes from standing in the fire and walking out the other side without letting it burn you down. After class, as students filed into the hallway, Amara felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Maria, one of the quiet girls from her honors math class, standing there with a shy, uncertain smile. "I just wanted to say," Maria began, voice almost swallowed by the hallway noise, "I think you're really brave. What they did wasn't right, and I'm glad you didn't let them win." Amara blinked, caught off guard for a second. Then she smiled a small, real smile. "Thank you," she said simply. Maria nodded quickly, ducking her head and hurrying off. It wasn't much, just a few words, but it meant more than 100 apologies would have. It meant seeds were planting. It meant cracks in old walls were deepening. Later that afternoon, an email went out from the school district, a formal announcement, acknowledging an investigation into harassment incidents, pledging stronger anti-bullying policies, promising stricter consequences for any student engaging in racial or socioeconomic discrimination. The email didn't name names, but again, everyone knew. Screens buzzed with screenshots of the email group. Chats lit up. Parents started asking questions. Savannah's name floated through the rumors like a sinking stone. Her father, a well-known local politician, was furious, according to whispers threatening legal action, but it didn't matter anymore, because public opinion at Cresthill had shifted. Once you shatter the illusion of invincibility, it doesn't rebuild easily. That evening, as Amara sat in her room, homework open but forgotten, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She hesitated, then opened it. It was simple. I'm sorry. No name. No signature. But she knew who it was. She stared at the message for a long moment, then set her phone down without replying. Not out of cruelty, out of peace. Because some battles you win by speaking, and some battles you win by knowing you no longer have to explain yourself. She had nothing left to prove. Not to them, not to anyone. Outside her window, the sky was finally clearing, the first stars poking through the dusky blue. Amra stood up, pushed the window open, and let the cool night air wash over her. The world was still messy, still unfair, but it was changing. Tiny ripples spreading out from a quiet girl in a gray hoodie who refused to break when the world tried to crush her. She breathed in deeply, smelling the distant scent of rain on pavement, and smiled. Tomorrow would come, and she would meet it. Standing. Tall, standing proud, standing free. Friday morning dawned bright and sharp, the kind of blue sky that looked like it belonged in a better world. But Amara Lewis knew better now. She zipped up her hoodie, grabbed her backpack, and headed out the door without a word. Her mother watched her from the kitchen, silent but proud. There was strength in letting your child fight their own battles. But today, Amara wouldn't be fighting alone. Today, someone else was waking up, someone who had been silent long enough. At Cresthill Prep, the day started like any other. Almost students still buzzed with the fallout of Savannah's suspension, still checked their phones for updates, still whispered nervously when Amara passed by. But there was something else today, too. A ripple in energy, like the moment before a thunderstorm. She felt it the second she stepped into the courtyard. Eyes turned not just to her, but to the black car pulling into the front circle. A sleek, matte black SUV, windows tinted so dark it seemed to drink the sunlight. It rolled to a slow stop, silent and deliberate. Doors opened, and out stepped a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit like armor. No tie, just an open-collar black shirt underneath. He walked with a smooth, measured pace, each step landing with quiet authority. Some students craned their necks trying to see who he was. Others shrank back instinctively, sensing something they couldn't name. Amara froze when she saw him, her father Marcus Lewis. She hadn't known he was coming, hadn't asked for it, but he was here, and not as some show of muscle, not to embarrass her, not to take control. He was here the way mountains are here, unmoving, unbreakable. He crossed the courtyard without hesitation, heading straight for the administration building. Students parted before him like grass bowing under a strong wind. Phones lifted, pictures snapped, but no one dared call out. Even the loudest voices at Cresthill fell silent because something about him said clearly without a single word, "This is not someone you play with." Inside the office, Mr. Andrews stood up so quickly he nearly knocked over his coffee. Ms. Green was already waiting, her face calm but alert. Marcus Lewis walked in, nodded once, and sat across from them without waiting to be invited. Mr. Andrews fumbled with his papers, clearing his throat nervously. "Lewis, we were addressing the situation involving your daughter, as you've seen from the district's response." Marcus lifted one hand, and the principal stopped talking immediately. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was low, measured, the kind of voice that didn't need to raise itself to command a room. "I'm not here for explanations," he said. "I'm here for outcomes, miss." Green hid a small smile behind her hand. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his eyes hard as flint. "My daughter came here for an education, not to survive a war zone. She has handled herself with dignity, grace and restraint far beyond what was required of her, and now it's your turn. You will ensure that moving forward this environment is not just safe for her, but safe for every student who walks through these doors." "Mr. Andrews nodded so quickly it looked painful. "Yes, sir," he stammered. We are committed to making immediate and lasting changes. Marcus held his gaze for a long moment, letting the weight of his presence sink in. Then he stood, buttoned his suit jacket with a slow, deliberate movement, and said, "I'll be watching." A simple sentence, a quiet promise and a warning no one in that office could possibly misunderstand. When he exited the building, the courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Amara stood there still near the steps. He walked over to her, his expression softening slightly. He placed a large warm hand on her shoulder, a silent reassurance. "You good kid?" he asked, voice low. Amara nodded, her throat tight with emotion she refused to show in front of everyone. "I'm good," she said. He smiled, then a rare small thing full of pride. "You did this? Not me," he said. Then he squeezed her shoulder, gently turned back to his car, and drove away as quietly as he had arrived, leaving only a ripple of stunned silence in his wake. The students watched Amara differently now, not because they were afraid of her father, but because they understood something they hadn't before. She wasn't alone. She never had been, and she wasn't someone to pity. She was someone to respect. The afternoon moved slowly, heavy with the aftershocks of what had just unfolded. Cresthill Prep was a place built on whispered status, on careful appearances, on knowing your place. But today the ground had shifted, and everyone felt it. Amara sat in her last class of the day, a quiet storm of energy beneath her calm exterior. She barely heard the teacher's lecture on economic theory, barely registered the clatter of pens and papers around her. All she felt was a deep grounding inside herself, like roots anchoring into the earth. She was no longer just surviving, she was becoming. When the bell rang, she packed up slowly, methodically. She didn't rush anymore. She didn't hurry to escape their stares. She walked through the hallways with a steady rhythm. Steps measured, hoodie up, shoulders back. And something strange began to happen. People moved aside, not in fear, but in recognition. A quiet respect forming where mockery used to live. At her locker, Amara found another note, this time written in careful, neat handwriting on a folded sheet of lined paper. She unfolded it, her heart beating faster. It read, "Thanks for showing us we don't have to stay silent. A friend." No name again. But this time she smiled because it didn't matter who. What mattered was someone had seen. Someone had found courage through hers. Later in the courtyard, as she sat sketching equations into her notebook, a group of underclassmen walked by. One of them, a younger black girl wearing a bright red backpack, slowed down. She hesitated for a second, then said in a rush, "You're really cool what you did. How you didn't let them push you down?" Amara looked up, meeting the girl's wide eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. The girl grinned, her braces flashing in the sunlight, then hurried to catch up with her friends. Amara closed her notebook, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. Small ripples, but powerful ones. Because once you show people it's possible to stand tall, they start to believe they can too. As the week wore on, the energy kept shifting. Little things at first, students speaking up more. When jokes crossed the line, teachers paying closer attention to who was being left out, who was being targeted, policies that had been dust-covered promises suddenly being enforced. Assemblies were scheduled, discussions held, real conversations about equity and dignity finally began, and at the center of it, without needing to shout, without needing to demand attention, was Amara, the girl in the hoodie who refused to bend. Of course, not everyone changed. Savannah's loyal few still lingered in corners, still sent cold glances like knives across crowded rooms, but their power was broken now, their hold on the story gone, because Amara had taken back the narrative. She had reminded everyone that dignity isn't something given by others. It's something you carry even when the world tries to strip it away, especially then. One afternoon, near the end of the week, as Amara gathered her things from her locker, She felt a familiar presence beside her. She turned. It was Mr. Callahan, her English teacher. He shifted awkwardly for a moment, clearing his throat. I just wanted to say, he began, his voice lower than usual. I should have spoken up sooner. We should have done better. Amara blinked. She hadn't expected this, Mr. Callahan looked genuinely uncomfortable, but genuinely sincere. I'm sorry, he finished. Amara didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it hang there for a beat, then she nodded. Thank you, she said, simple, true enough. That night at home, Amara sat on her bed, hoodie draped across her knees. She traced the stitching absent-mindedly, feeling every thread like a scar, like a badge of survival. The hoodie had started as a shield, a piece of armor against a hostile world. But now it was something more, a symbol, a story, not just hers, but one shared by everyone who had ever been judged for how they looked, for where they came from, for daring to take up space in places that told them they didn't belong. Smiled, a soft, small thing, but real, and she whispered into the quiet, I belong everywhere. I decide to stand. The night outside was deep and still, the stars bright above the rooftops. Amara pulled her hoodie on, pulled it tight around her shoulders like a crown, and stood by her window watching the world stretch out before her. So much left to fight for, so much left to change. But she was ready, not angry, not broken. Ready because silent power is still power, and sometimes it's the most unstoppable kind. By the next week, the quiet at Cresthill Prep was no longer heavy with fear. It was something else now, something stronger. Hope it moved through the hallways in glances shared between students, in small nods exchanged during passing periods, in the way people held their heads just a little higher. Not loud, not flashy, but real. Amara could feel it every time she stepped onto campus. The weight that had once tried to crush her was lifting, not because the world had gotten easier, but because she had gotten stronger, and because others had seen her strength and found pieces of it. Inside the mess, elves too. One afternoon after history class, a boy she barely knew, Malik, from her chemistry lab group, approached her near the stairwell. He shifted from foot to foot, clearly nervous, before blurting out, we're starting something, a student group for kids who feel like they don't fit the perfect Cresthill mold. You know, scholarship, kids first gen. Anyone tired of pretending? He looked at her hopefully. We want you to come, maybe even help lead it. Amara blinked, caught off guard. She wasn't used to being asked to lead anything before. All she had wanted was to survive, to be left alone. Now they were looking to her, not because she was loud, not because she demanded it, because she had shown them it could be done. Amara nodded slowly. I'll come, she said. Malik's face lit up and he jogged off down the hall, grinning like he had just won something. Maybe he had. Maybe they all had. That evening, the first meeting was held quietly in the far corner of the library. No teachers, no announcements. Just a handful of students huddled together between the towering shelves. Amara counted 12 people, more than she expected. Different colors, different backgrounds, different stories, but all carrying the same quiet tiredness, the same need for something more. Malik stood and cleared his throat awkwardly. So, we don't have a real name yet, but this is about making space. He said space where no one has to be embarrassed about who they are or pretend they're something they're not just to fit in. Heads nodded around the circle. Amara sat there for a moment, taking it all in. Then she found herself speaking, not rehearsed, not loud, just real, I think she said slowly. It's not about demanding a seat at their table anymore. It's about building our own. The words landed like stones, dropped into still water, rippling outward, and she saw it then. The spark, the beginning of something they had built, the M's, Elves, something no amount of cruelty could tear down. By the end of the meeting, they had a name. The Cresthill Collective, simple, strong. A reminder that alone they might be small, but together they were undeniable. News of the collective spread faster than anyone expected. Within a week, more students asked to join. Not just scholarship kids, others too. Students who had stayed quiet during the worst moments. Students who realized they didn't want to live under the old rules anymore. It was small, still deliberate. They didn't shout. They didn't stage walkouts or protests. They simply existed, proudly, unapologetically. And that was its own kind of rebellion. Savannah Blake returned to school eventually, her suspension over. But the world she came back to was different. She still walked the halls with her perfect hair and polished smile. But the crowd that used to follow her had thinned. People saw now, they remembered. And no amount of charm could erase the memory of what she had done or who had stood against it. Savannah passed Amara in the hallway one morning, their eyes locking for just a second. There was no anger there, no open hatred, just a brittle kind of resentment, a girl who realized too late that the story she had tried to control had slipped out of her hands. Amara simply nodded once, then walked on. No words needed, because the battle was over and she had already won. On Friday afternoon, the collective met again in the library. This time there were almost 30 students. Amara sat at the head of the group. Hoodie pulled up, not hiding anymore. Just claiming her space, Malik tossed her a wide grin. "You're kind of our president now, whether you like it or not." He teased Amara, laughed quietly, the sound surprising even herself. She didn't need titles, didn't need spotlights. All she needed was this, a space she helped create, a story she helped rewrite. As the sun dipped below the windows, casting long golden shadows across the worn carpet, Amara looked around the circle. Different faces, different voices, all stronger than they had been before. She pulled her hoodie tighter around her shoulders, a small private gesture, and whispered to herself, "We are the story now, not what they said, not what they tried to make her believe. The real story, the silent power, the unstoppable kind." The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday. It wasn't loud. There were no shouting matches in the hallways, no dramatic confrontations, just a simple announcement slipped quietly into the morning homeroom news, effective immediately. All students found guilty of harassment during the Cresthill investigation will be barred from participating in homecoming events and all senior leadership activities. No names mentioned, no fanfare. But everyone knew exactly who that policy was for. At lunch, the cafeteria buzzed with low whispers, heads turning toward the far table near the windows where Savannah Blake usually held court. But today she sat alone. No crowd, no laughter. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped nervously against the plastic lunch tray, her posture stiff, unnatural. Across the room, Amara noticed, not with triumph, not with glee, but with a kind of solemn clarity. This was what always happens when the truth finally finds its way to the surface. The masks crack. The walls crumble, and those who built their power on cruelty discover how fragile it truly was. Later that afternoon, as Amara was gathering her books at her locker, two students brushed past her, speaking in hushed, frantic tones. "Did you hear Savannah's dad tried to pull her out of school? Threatened to sue." "Yeah, but apparently the district has everything documented, screenshots, witness statements, the whole thing." The voices faded as they hurried down the hall. Amara slid her notebook into her backpack, slowly processing the words. She wasn't surprised people like Savannah were used to getting their way, used to doors opening without knocking. But not this time. Not anymore. Outside in the courtyard under the oak trees, beginning to lose their leaves, Amara found Malik sitting on the low brick wall with a group from the collective. They were laughing, talking, planning the next fundraiser for a local literacy program. Normal things. Good things. Amara smiled as she approached. She felt Malik notice her before she even spoke. He waved her over, grinning. "Hey, you hear the news," he said, tossing her a wrapped granola bar like a peace offering. Amara caught it. Easily. "Yeah," she said. "Feels like things are finally shifting." Malik nodded. "They're scared," he said simply. "They're scared because they can't control the story anymore." Amara unwrapped the granola bar, took a slow, thoughtful bite. She knew he was right, and that fear, that loss of control, wasn't just hitting Savannah. It was hitting everyone who had once believed they could shape reality with whispers and exclusion. The balance had shifted, and Amara's silent strength had pushed it. That evening, social media lit up again, but this time it wasn't mocking videos or cruel memes. It was screenshots, real ones, messages Savannah had sent, group chats, where she bragged about putting the hoodie girl in her place, where she encouraged others to join in. Someone, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of survival, had leaked everything. It spread fast, not just through students, but to parents, teachers, even local news reporters sniffing around the edges. By midnight, Savannah's name wasn't whispered anymore. It was trending, and not in the way she had always wanted. The next morning, Cresthill felt different again. Savannah didn't show up to school. Rumors said her family was handling it privately, whatever that meant. Some said she would transfer, others said her father was trying to bury the story before it ruined his re-election campaign. Amara moved through the halls as usual, quiet, steady. But now when people looked at her, it wasn't with suspicion or mockery or pity. It was with something new: respect, recognition, the silent acknowledgement owed to someone who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. During lunch, Maria from the collective sat down next to Amara, her tray clattering slightly. Guess what Maria said? Breathless with excitement. "They're putting up a new student council proposal, one that actually includes representation from students like us." Amara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "They're creating a new position, equity and inclusion liaison." Maria continued, "And they're asking for nominations." She nudged Amara with her elbow, grinning. "You know everyone's going to nominate you, right?" Amara laughed softly, a real laugh, warm and full. She hadn't done any of this for titles, for spotlights. But if her standing up meant opening doors for the ones coming after her, then maybe it was time. Maybe it had always been time. That night, sitting at her desk at home, Amara opened a blank page in her journal. At the top, she wrote one word: rebuild, because it wasn't enough to tear down broken systems. You had to build something better in their place, something stronger, something rooted not in fear, but in courage and truth, and in the silent, unstoppable power of those who refuse to be erased. The offer came quietly, just like everything else that mattered at Cresthill. No banners, no speeches, no promises of glory. Just a folded note slipped under her locker door one morning, neatly written in careful block letters. "We believe in you. Nominate yourself. Lead us." No signature, but Amara didn't need one. She already knew where it came from. The collective. The students who had watched, waited, and now stood ready, waiting for someone to say it was okay to step forward, waiting for someone to show them how. At lunch, Amara sat at her usual table outside her tray, untouched, her mind racing. Nominate herself. Stand up again. Not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been pushed to the margins, told they were lucky just to be allowed inside the building. The weight of it pressed against her ribs, tight, heavy. She didn't crave attention. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to survive, to breathe, to build her own life. But maybe survival wasn't enough anymore. Maybe survival had to turn into something bigger, something that could not be ignored. Across the courtyard, she spotted Maria, Malik, a few others from the collective. They were laughing, talking, planning. Living the world had tried to crush them, and still they were here. Still fighting. Still dreaming. Amara looked down at her hands, at the faint ink stains on her fingers, the calluses from years of clutching pencils and books too tightly. Hands that had built something even if no one had ever seen it before. She took a breath long and slow and made her decision. After the final bell rang, Amara made her way to the main office. The halls were mostly empty. The world outside dipped in golden, late afternoon light. She pushed open the door, stepped up to the front desk. The secretary looked up surprised to see her. "I'd like to submit a nomination for the new student council position." Amara said, her voice steady. The woman blinked, then smiled faintly. "Name?" she asked Amara. "Lewis," she answered without hesitation. She signed her name carefully on the clipboard, pressing the pen firmly against the paper. Permanent, undeniable. That night she told her mom over dinner. Dr. Lewis set down her fork, smiling in that quiet way she always did when she was proud. "You're not stepping into their world," she said. "You're making them step into yours." Amara didn't say anything at first. She just nodded, feeling the truth of it settle deep in her bones, because that was exactly it. She wasn't chasing their approval anymore. She was building something they couldn't ignore, a space where everyone mattered, where everyone belonged in. It started with her choosing to stand. The next morning, the announcement came over the loudspeaker. Nominations for the new Student Council Equity and Inclusion Liaison have been posted on the main board near the library. Elections will be held next Friday. Students crowded around the bulletin board between classes. Amara didn't rush. She moved through the crowds with her usual quiet calm. When she reached the board, she saw her name, printed clearly among a handful of others. Some she recognized, some she didn't. But she noticed something important. When people saw her name, they didn't laugh. They didn't whisper. They nodded. Some even smiled because they understood now. This wasn't about one scholarship girl in a hoodie anymore. This was about all of them. Later that afternoon, as she packed her books after class, Mr. Callahan stopped by her desk. "You've come a long way, Amara," he said quietly, "and you didn't lose yourself doing it. That matters more than you know." Amara looked up, met his gaze squarely. "Thanks," she said simply, because that was all that needed to be said. That evening, Amara sat by her window again, the cool breeze stirring the pages of her notebook. She opened it to a blank page, picked up her pen, and began to write her campaign speech, not filled with promises or slogans, just truth. Her truth about resilience, about dignity, about refusing to let the world tell you where you belong. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear. As she wrote, the stars blinked into the darkening sky above Cresthill. Each one a silent witness, each one a reminder that even the smallest light could defy the darkness, that even the quietest voice, if it spoke from truth, could echo louder than 1,000 shouts. Amara smiled to herself, tapping her pen against the page. She was ready, ready to tell her story, ready to lead, ready to rebuild the world she deserved to live in. And she would do it the same way she had survived everything. Else not by shouting the loudest, but by standing the strongest. Election day came quietly. No banners, no speeches, blasting from speakers. Just a table set up outside the library, a stack of ballots and a simple sign taped to the front. "Vote today." Amara stood in the hallway for a moment before approaching. Students buzzed around her, some whispering, some smiling openly, some still unsure. But all eyes found her, eventually, the girl in the gray hoodie. The girl who had refused to bow her. Had even when the world tried to crush her. She stepped up to the table, took a ballot, and filled it out neatly. No hesitation, no trembling hand, just a simple, steady check mark next to her own name. It wasn't arrogance. It was affirmation, a promise to herself, to every kid who ever sat alone at lunch, every kid who ever folded them's, elves smaller to fit into spaces too small for their dreams. When she dropped the ballot into the locked box, it made a soft thunk, small but powerful. The rest of the day moved slowly. Teachers pretended things were normal lessons drawn across whiteboards, homework assigned, but everyone was waiting to see if the tides at Cresthill were truly changing, or if it was just a passing moment. Amara didn't fidget, didn't pace. She moved through her classes like she always did, focused, silent, strong, because the outcome didn't define her. Her standing had already said enough. By last period, the results were ready. Students packed into the auditorium, buzzing with anticipation. The principal stood at the podium, papers trembling slightly in his hands. Amara sat with the collective near the back, Maria and Malik on either side of her, offering quiet smiles, quiet support. The principal cleared his throat, his voice carrying through the hush. And now for the election results for the new Student Council, Equity and Inclusion Liaison. He paused a long beat. Amara folded her hands in her lap, steady, waiting ready. The winner, he said finally, by a significant margin, is Amara Lewis. There was a beat of stunned silence, a heartbeat where the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the applause started, not raucous, not wild, but real, genuine students clapped, some standing, some just smiling where they sat. Amara rose slowly, moving through the aisle toward the stage. Each step felt heavier, not from fear, but from the weight of what it meant. This wasn't just a title. This was a door opening, not just for her, for everyone. She climbed the steps, took the small plaque they handed her, stood in front of the microphone. The applause faded, the room waiting. Amara looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some unknown, all waiting, all listening. She didn't have a speech written. She didn't need one. She just spoke from the heart, from the place inside her that had weathered every storm. I didn't run for this because I wanted to win. Amara said, I ran because I know what it feels like to be invisible, to be overlooked, to be told without words that you don't belong. She let her words settle, soft but undeniable. I'm here to make sure no one at Cresthill feels like that again. I'm here to build a space where being different isn't a weakness, it's a strength. Another pause. The room hung on her every word. And I want you to know, she said, her voice steady. You don't have to be loud to be powerful, you just have to stand. A wave of murmured agreement rippled through the crowd, small but real. She smiled, then a small, steady thing. Thank you for believing we could be better. Thank you for believing in me, and thank you for believing in yourselves. She stepped back from the microphone, the applause rising again, this time louder, stronger, because now they weren't just clapping for a winner, they were clapping for a future. After the assembly, students came up to her, offering congratulations, handshakes, hugs. Even teachers smiled as she passed. The air at Cresthill felt different now. Lighter, freer, not perfect, but better. And better was a beginning. Later that night, Amara sat on her bed, the plaque resting against her knees, her hoodie still warm from the day's sun. She ran her fingers across the engraved letters. Amara Lewis, Equity and Inclusion Liaison, 2025. She smiled to herself, a small, quiet smile, because titles fade, awards gather dust, but the change she had made, the doors she had opened, those would last, those would echo, silent, steady, unstoppable, just like her. The days after the election passed like pages fluttering in a soft breeze. Cresthill shifted in small ways, ways that mattered more than banners or speeches. Students who had once stayed silent now spoke up when something was wrong. Teachers who had once looked away now paused and listened. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And sometimes better was enough to start a revolution. Amara Lewis moved through the hallways with the same quiet strength as before. She didn't walk faster. She didn't smile wider. She didn't bask in the attention that now buzzed gently around her, because the real victory wasn't in being seen. It was in knowing she had never needed their permission to exist in the first place. One afternoon, a boy named Caleb, someone she barely knew, approached her at her locker. He fidgeted with the straps of his backpack before speaking. "Hey, I just wanted to say." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I used to laugh along with them, back when it was easier, back when I thought it didn't matter." He looked at the floor, shame coloring his face. "But it did matter, and I'm sorry." Amara studied him for a moment. He wasn't looking for forgiveness. He was offering truth, and sometimes that was harder to give than anything else. She nodded once. "Thank you," she said simply. Caleb's shoulders sagged with relief, and he hurried away. Later that day, Amara sat under the oak trees in the courtyard, her hoodie pulled up against the chill of early fall. She watched the golden leaves spiral down from the branches, each one dancing its own slow, graceful fall. She thought about all the battles she had fought, the ones outside, the ones inside, and she realized something. The biggest battle had never been against Savannah, or against the whispers, or against the cruel rumors. The biggest battle had been inside herself, to stay soft. In a world that wanted to harden her, to stay kind. In a world that mistook kindness for weakness. To stay herself even when they tried to make her feel like she was nothing. That was the real lesson. As the wind picked up, rustling the leaves around her sneakers, Amara pulled out her notebook. Not to do homework, not to write campaign plans, just to write for herself. She scribbled a simple line across the top of the page. "Strength is not how loud you can shout. It's how quietly you can stand when no one claps." She smiled to herself because now she knew. Now she understood. That evening at home, her mother found her sitting at the kitchen table, a half-empty mug of tea beside her, papers spread out in loose piles. Dr. Lewis sat down across from her, resting her chin on one hand. "You seem different lately," she said, not unkindly. Amara looked up, meeting her mother's steady gaze. "I think," she said slowly, "I used to think winning meant proving them wrong, making them see me differently." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But now I get it. Winning is just staying true to myself, even when it's hard, even when no one notices, even when it feels like it doesn't matter." Dr. Lewis smiled softly. "That's a lesson most adults never figure out," she said. "You're ahead of the curve." Amara chuckled, a quiet, short laugh. "But real, I had good teachers," she said. The next morning, she slipped on her hoodie, zipped it up, and headed for the door. Her reflection caught her eye in the hallway mirror. Not a girl hiding anymore. Not a girl shrinking herself to fit into a world too small for her. A young woman, standing tall, carrying her story proudly. She tipped her head slightly as if saluting her own reflection and smiled, a soft thing, but full of iron. At Cresthill, the collective was growing. More students joined every week. Some spoke up in meetings, some just listened, some found their courage slowly. One word at a time. Amara didn't need to lead every conversation, didn't need to hold every hand. Her presence was enough, her standing was enough. And that was the real victory. Changing the air itself, making it safer, softer, stronger for those who came next. As she crossed the courtyard that morning, Malik jogged up beside her. "Hey," he said, slightly breathless. "We're thinking about starting a mentoring program, pairing upperclassmen with freshmen who feel like outsiders." You and Amara grinned, the corners of her mouth lifting under her hoodie. "Always," she said, because this was what it was about. Not just surviving, but reaching back, building ladders for the next to climb higher. Creating spaces she had once needed herself and filling them with light. The world would always try to make people like her invisible, would always try to tell them to be smaller, quieter, grateful, just to be allowed in the room. But Amara had learned the most important lesson. Her story wasn't something to apologize for. It was something to wear like armor or like a hoodie. Soft, strong, silent, unbreakable. By mid-October, the leaves around Cresthill blazed in brilliant reds and oranges, a final burst of color before the winter came. And something in the school felt different too, not louder, not flashier, just better. Students walked the halls a little straighter, teachers listened a little longer, spaces that once felt cold and closed off now buzzed with quiet. Steady hope change didn't roar through the front doors. It seeped in slow and certain like sunlight through a cracked window. And Amara Lewis stood in the center of it all, not as a hero draped in banners, but as a quiet foundation, the still point around which everything else slowly turned. It wasn't just her friends who noticed one afternoon after English class. As Amara gathered her books, someone approached her from the edge of the room. She looked up and blinked. It was Brianna, one of Savannah's old circle. Someone who had laughed the loudest when the cafeteria tray came crashing down. Brianna looked nervous, wringing the strap of her designer purse with both hands. "Hey," she said. Voice soft, awkward. Amara waited, not offering anything. Not rescuing her from the silence, Brianna swallowed hard. "I just—" She hesitated, then rushed on. "I just wanted to say I was wrong. Back then I saw what they were doing. I even laughed because it was easier, because I didn't want to be next." She stared at the floor. "I'm sorry, you didn't deserve any of it." Amara let the moment stretch. She could have said 1,000 things. She could have talked about how much it hurt, how lonely it had been, how every laugh felt like a shove. But she didn't, because this wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what came next. Amara nodded once slowly. "Thank you for telling me," she said. And Brianna looked up, something like relief flickering across her face. Not redemption, not yet, but maybe the first step. Word spread quietly that Amara wasn't someone to fear or resent or mock. She was someone to learn from, someone who had shown what it meant to stand and stay standing without ever needing to crush anyone else. Her silence had been misread as weakness. Now it was seen for what it truly was, strength, the kind that couldn't be shouted down. In the weeks that followed, Amara kept building. The Cresthill collective grew from a handful to dozens, then more freshmen who were scared to speak, found mentors who listened, students who had once sat alone, found tables waiting for them. It wasn't perfect. There were still bad days, still careless jokes, still old habits that died hard. But there was also something else now: resistance, resilience, community. One afternoon, as Amara set up chairs for a collective meeting in the library, Malik came over grinning. "Guess what?" he said. She raised an eyebrow. "They're putting your quote up in the main hallway," he said. "The one you said at the election assembly. The one about standing, even when no one claps." Amara blinked, surprised. "They asked permission," though Malik added quickly. "They wanted to be official." Amara laughed softly, a warm sound that caught even her by surprise. "Let's do it," she said, not because she needed her words on a wall, but because maybe the next quiet kid who walked these halls would see it and know they weren't alone. That night, Amara and her mother sat on the porch together, watching the stars emerge one by one. "You've built something real," Dr. Lewis said quietly. Amara hugged her knees to her chest, smiling at the dark sky. "I didn't do it alone," she said. Her mother nodded. "No one ever does." Later in her room, Amara pulled out her journal. She flipped past old pages, past the scribbled notes and messy doodles, and heavy words written on hard days. She found a clean page. At the top, she wrote, "What matters most is not that you fight back. It's that you fight forward." She underlined it twice because standing still wasn't enough. She had learned that now you had to move forward. Even if it was slow, even if it was lonely, you had to keep going, keep building, keep believing. At Cresthill, fall turned slowly to winter. The trees outside stood bare against the sky, their branches etched black against the fading light. And inside, something stronger was taking root. Not because of noise, not because of power, but because of quiet, persistent, unbreakable strength. The kind Amara had carried all along, the kind that would last. The first snowfall came early that year. By the end of November, Cresthill's lawns and rooftops were dusted with soft powder, turning the whole campus into something quiet and new. Students bundled into heavy coats and scarves, their laughter misting in the cold air. The world seemed softer somehow, wrapped in white. But for Amara Lewis, the real changes had already taken root long before the snow fell. Inside her, around her, and now one last test waited. It came in the form of a folded letter. Left in her locker, no name, just a simple envelope with her initials written in small, shaky handwriting. Amara hesitated before opening it, a flicker of old hurt stirring deep in her chest. But she forced herself to breathe, to stay steady. She unfolded the paper, slowly reading the words printed there. I know I can't undo what I did. I know I hurt you. I made you smaller because I was afraid of how big you already were. You didn't deserve any of it. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know, I see you now. And I'm sorry. Savannah. Amara stared at the letter for a long moment. The hallway buzzed around her, students chatting, lockers slamming, boots squeaking against the tile. But she stood in the center of it all, still calm, feeling the weight of the apology settle into her hands. Not heavy, not light, just, real. She folded the letter carefully, slipped it into the back of her notebook, and made her choice. No anger, no revenge, no triumphant victory lap. Because forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had been done. It was about refusing to carry it any longer, refusing to let it own her. Amara zipped up her hoodie, shouldered her backpack, and moved on. Not because she had to, but because she could. That afternoon, the collective hosted a winter donation drive, collecting coats and blankets for local families in need. The library buzzed with energy, tables piled high with soft, colorful bundles. Amara moved through the room, offering quiet smiles, nodding encouragement. She spotted Maria carefully stacking donated scarves, Malik arguing good-naturedly with someone over how to organize jackets by size. Normal things, good things. She paused near the door, watching it all, and she realized something: the story that had started with her hoodie, the story they once tried to turn into a joke. It had grown beyond her now. It was bigger than just one girl surviving a cruel moment. It was a movement, a culture, a future being written, one quiet act at a time. Later, as the drive wound down, Malik came over holding a clipboard. You know what I was thinking, he said. Amara raised an eyebrow, smiling slightly. Always dangerous when you start like that. He grinned. Next year, we should make this an annual thing, a Cresthill tradition. He tapped the clipboard against his palm. And we name it after you, Amara laughed, shaking her head. No way, she said. I'm just part of it. We all are. Malik shrugged, unbothered. Still, someone has to be first. Someone has. To stand, he meant someone has to show it's possible. Amara thought about that as she helped fold up tables, gather leftover gloves into boxes. Being first wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about being the voice that stayed steady when everything else shook. That night, after a long hot shower and a quiet dinner, Amara sat by her window again. The snow outside glowed under the streetlights, everything blanketed in soft gold and silver. She pulled on her hoodie, the same one from that very first day. It still smelled faintly like detergent, and library books still carried a small stain near the cuff that wouldn't come out. Battle scars, memories proof. Amara leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the snow fall in slow spirals. She thought about Savannah, about Caleb, about Brianna, about all the faces that had once turned away and now were slowly turning back. And she realized she didn't need their apologies to be whole. She had never been broken. She had been tested, and she had endured, not by shouting them down, not by becoming what they were, but by remaining who she was. She closed her eyes, whispered a small prayer to the night, for strength, for grace, for the wisdom to keep walking forward, even when it would have been easier to turn back. Because in the end, the most powerful stories are not the ones told about you. They're the ones you live, every quiet, unyielding, unstoppable step. The first Monday of December dawned bright and bitter cold. Frost clung to the windows, the sidewalks glistened with ice, and Cresthill Prep stood against the pale winter sky. Like a castle wrapped in silver, Amara Lewis zipped up her hoodie, tugged the edges snug around her face, and stepped outside into the sharp morning air. She moved down the street, backpack slung over one shoulder, her breath puffing white against the blue. And even though everything around her felt frozen and still inside, she burned steady and warm. At school, the final rush before winter break buzzed through the halls. Students compared holiday plans, traded last-minute gifts, rushed to turn in overdue assignments. But through it all, Amara felt a strange kind of peace, not because the world was perfect, but because she had learned to carry her own peace inside herself, no matter what swirled around her. In her first class, the teacher handed back essays. Amara accepted hers, quietly flipping to the back page. A simple note was scrawled in the margin: "Your voice is powerful, never doubt it." She smiled, tucking the paper into her folder. It wasn't about the grade. It was about being heard, about knowing her words carried weight, even when spoken softly. At lunch, the courtyard was mostly empty, the cold driving students indoors. But Amara still chose her usual table, sitting under the bare oak tree, watching the clouds drift low across the sky. Maria found her there a few minutes later, carrying two steaming cups. She slid one across the table without a word. Amara accepted it with a small nod, wrapping her hands around the warm paper cup. They sat in companionable silence, watching the wind chase dried leaves across the frozen ground. It wasn't the kind of friendship built on loud declarations. It was the kind forged in understanding, in survival, in knowing when words were unnecessary. After school, Amara helped the collective set up a holiday drive in the library. The room buzzed with quiet energy, students stringing up simple decorations, stacking donations neatly along the walls. At one point, Malik bumped into a box of canned goods, sending them rolling across the floor. The room erupted in laughter. Real laughter, the kind that felt easy, safe, earned. Amara knelt to help him gather the cans, grinning despite herself, graceful as ever. She teased Malik, shrugged unbothered. "Wouldn't be a real collective meeting without me causing mild chaos," he said. They laughed again, the sound filling the warm, book-scented air. And Amara realized this too was part of the story. Not just the battles, but the joy, the rebuilding, the moments when survival blossomed into living. As the sun set, casting long, golden beams across the library floor, Amara slipped outside. The sky stretched wide and deep above her, the first stars beginning to prick through the velvet blue. She pulled up her hoodie, tucked her hands into her pockets, and started walking. No destination in mind, just forward, always forward. Passing the main hall, she caught her reflection in the big glass windows, a girl in a gray hoodie moving steady through the winter night. Once they had seen that hoodie as a threat, as a target. Now it was a banner, a reminder that she had walked through fire and come out carrying something stronger than pride, dignity, self-respect, an unshakable knowledge of who she was and who she would always be. Inside the main hallway, she could just make out the new plaque mounted on the wall. The one bearing her, quote, "You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to stand." She smiled, soft and sure. It didn't need her name underneath it. Anyone who needed to know would know, and anyone who needed the reminder would find it long after she was gone. As she crossed the parking lot toward home, Amara felt the cold bite at her fingers, the wind tug at her sleeves, but inside she stayed warm. She thought about everything she had faced, every whisper, every shove, every sideways glance. And she knew she would face them again. The world wouldn't stop testing her, challenging her, pushing back against her presence. But she would keep walking anyway, not because she needed to prove anything, but because her existence was already proof. Proof that resilience could be soft, that power could be silent, that a hoodie could be a crown if you wore it right. She crossed the last street, the porch light of her house glowing warmly in the distance. The stars spun slow and patient overhead, and without a word, without a speech, without needing anyone to notice. Amara Lewis kept walking forward into the night, into her future, into her story, still wearing her hoodie, still carrying her silent power, still standing, always standing. The days grew shorter. Mornings came late and cold, the sun barely climbing over the rooftops before slipping away. Again, winter pressed down on Cresthill like a heavy quilt. But inside its halls, something else was growing. Not louder, just stronger, more certain. The kind of change you could feel even if you couldn't always see it. Amara moved through her final weeks quietly, submitting college applications, finishing projects, helping organize collective meetings. She didn't make speeches. She didn't seek applause. She simply kept doing the work because real change wasn't about moments. It was about momentum. Small steps, silent victories each day building on the one before. In early January, the principal announced a new tradition. The Cresthill Collective would host a yearly winter drive, a leadership summit for first-generation students and workshops on equity and inclusion. It was official now, written into the school's calendar, etched into its culture. Not because someone demanded it, but because someone lived it. Amara sat in the back of the auditorium during the announcement, hoodie up, hands tucked into her sleeves. When students turned to look at her, wasn't mockery in their eyes anymore. It was respect. It was gratitude. After the assembly, a younger girl Amara barely knew, probably a freshman, stopped her outside the cafeteria. She hesitated, shifting from foot to foot. Finally, she blurted out, "I'm joining the collective next week. I didn't think people like me belonged here before, but now I do." She smiled shyly. "Because of you," Amara smiled back, soft and real. "You always belonged," she said. "You just needed someone to remind you." The girl beamed, then hurried off to catch up with her friends, and Amara stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the crowd, feeling the warmth spread through her chest, because sometimes the best victories were the quiet ones, the ones you never saw coming. As graduation crept closer, Amara started packing up pieces of her life at Cresthill, old notebooks, crinkled posters from collective events. The gray hoodie that had traveled every hallway, weathered every storm. She washed it carefully, folded it with reverence. Not because she was leaving it behind, but because it was coming with her, a piece of who she was, who she had always been, who she would always be. One afternoon, Maria and Malik threw her a small goodbye party in the library. Nothing fancy, just pizza balloons, a hand-drawn card signed by half the school. They laughed, they shared stories, they made promises to stay in touch. Toward the end, Maria stood up awkwardly, holding a thin, flat package wrapped in gold paper. "We got you something," she said. Amara raised an eyebrow, smirking. "You didn't have to. Shut up and open it," Malik interrupted. Grinning, Amara laughed, ripping the paper carefully. Inside was a framed photograph, a picture of the collective's very first meeting. Blurry, awkward, full of slouched shoulders and nervous smiles. And across the bottom in careful lettering, "Because you stood, we could rise." Amara felt her throat tighten. She traced the edge of the frame with one finger, blinking hard. She didn't have words. She didn't need them. Her smile said enough. That night, sitting on her bed with the photograph balanced on her knees, Amara thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the fight, the victories, the scars. And she knew none of it had been wasted. Every tear, every silence, every heavy step. It had all built something bigger than she could have imagined. Something that would outlast her. When she closed her eyes, she didn't see the pain. She saw Malik arguing about pizza toppings, Maria laughing too hard at bad jokes, freshmen peeking nervously into their first collective meeting. She saw a future she had helped carve out of stone and silence, a future that didn't need her to stay, because it was strong enough to stand on its own now. In the morning, she pulled on her hoodie, slung her backpack over one shoulder, and stepped into the cold, crisp air. Cresthill stretched out before her, quiet and familiar. But it wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the ones coming after, the ones who would find her words on the wall, her footsteps worn into the floor, the ones who would carry the story forward, adding their own chapters, their own struggles, their own silent victories. Amara Lewis didn't look back as she walked down the front steps. She didn't need to, because everything that mattered was already moving ahead of her, carried by every student who dared to believe they could belong, who dared to stand, who dared to walk on the bus station, smelled like coffee and cold metal. Announcements crackled overhead. People shuffled past with heavy bags and heavier eyes. Amara Lewis sat quietly by the wide frosted windows, her backpack tucked at her feet, her gray hoodie sipped up against the early morning chill. Her acceptance letter peeked out from her notebook, creased from being reread too many times. It was official now. She was leaving Cresthill, leaving everything she had fought through, everything she had quietly conquered, and she was ready, more ready than she had ever thought she would be. The bus pulled in slowly, brakes hissing against the icy pavement. People stood shoulder their bags lined up without speaking. Amara rose with them, her heart beating slow and steady. No fear, no regret, only a quiet certainty, because she wasn't running away from anything. She was walking toward everything. As she climbed the steps onto the bus, the driver gave her a small nod. Half distracted by his radio, Amara found a seat near the middle next to a window smeared slightly with frost. She settled in, pulled her hoodie tighter, and watched the world outside begin to blur as the engine rumbled to life. The station slipped away, the town slipped away, and still she sat calm, anchored, because she carried her home inside her now. Not a building, not a place, but a knowing, a quiet. Unshakable knowing. Miles slid by the landscape, opening into wide frozen fields and sleepy towns. Amara rested her head against the cool glass, letting her mind drift. She thought of Cresthill, of every whispered insult, every stolen moment of courage, every small kindness that bloomed when she least expected it. She thought of Malik, Maria, the collective. She thought of the girl she had been when she first stepped through Cresthill's doors. Shoulders hunched, hood pulled tight, carrying all her hopes and fears. In a single backpack, she smiled softly. That girl hadn't been weak. She had been ready. She just didn't know it yet. The bus rattled over a bridge, the sun rising slowly over the horizon. Amara pulled her journal from her bag, flipped to the last blank page. She uncapped her pen, thought for a long moment, then wrote 3 simple lines I walked through. I stood my ground. I am still walking. She underlined the last line twice, slow, deliberate, permanent. Hours later, the bus hissed to a stop in a new city. Taller buildings, busier streets, different air. Amara gathered her bag, slung it over one shoulder, and stepped off the bus into the bright, hard winter light. The world was bigger here, louder, faster. But she wasn't afraid, because she had already faced worse. She had already learned that no matter where she stood, no matter who tried to erase her, her story traveled with her, woven into the fabric of her hoodie, stitched into the calluses, on her hands, etched into the steel of her spine. As she walked through the busy streets toward her new beginning, heads turned, some curious, some cautious, but Amara didn't shrink, didn't hurry. She walked the same way she always had, steady, sure, silent. She passed glass towers and crowded cafes, open parks dusted with snow buskers, playing half-frozen guitars on street corners. Life pulsed all around her, messy, loud, imperfect, and somehow beautiful, because the world didn't have to be easy for it to be hers. She had earned her place here, not by shouting the loudest, but by refusing to be moved. At a crosswalk, Amara paused, waiting for the light to change. Next to her, a young girl tugged at her mother's hand, staring up at Amara's hoodie with wide, curious eyes. The mother smiled apologetically, but Amara just smiled back. A small smile, the kind that carried miles of road behind it. The light turned green, and Amara stepped forward, one foot then the other, moving through the city, moving into her future, carrying all the silent power she had ever built, ever earned, ever become. There were more battles ahead, more doors to open, more walls to crack. Amara knew that she welcomed it because every step she took, every breath she claimed was a reminder. She didn't need permission to exist. She didn't need approval to matter. She didn't need applause to be powerful. She just needed to keep walking, head high, hoodie up, heart steady, always forward, always standing, always walking on. In a world that often measures strength by how loudly you shout, Amara Lewis showed us something different. She showed us that real power isn't noisy. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't beg for approval. Real power walks quietly through the storms, keeps standing after the laughter fades, and builds a future no one else dared imagine. With every silent step she took, with every moment she chose dignity over anger, Amara carved a new path not just for herself, but for everyone who would come after. She didn't shout. She didn't fight to be seen. She simply refused to disappear, and in doing so, she became impossible to ignore. Her hoodie wasn't a shield to hide behind. It became a symbol of resilience, of defiance, of unbreakable hope. And as she walks forward into her next chapter, she leaves behind more than just memories. She leaves behind a legacy written not in grand gestures, but in every quiet act of courage, every time she chose to walk, on every time she stood when it would have been easier to sit down. If Amara's story inspired you, if it reminded you of your own silent battles, we invite you to be part of our journey. Subscribe to Silent Power Stories for more powerful stories like this. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, and hit the bell so you never miss a moment of courage. Because sometimes the ones who whisper change the world the most.